The smell of garlic bread and expensive cologne hung in the air of Marino's Steakhouse on a Wednesday night that started like every other Wednesday and ended with 23-year-old Waitress bleeding out on the travertine floor, while the most dangerous man in New Orleans knelt beside her and made her a promise she never asked for. Her name was Piper Daw. She was saving up to finish her nursing degree, carrying $42,000 in student debt on a frame that barely cleared 5'3", and she had been working double shifts at Marino's for the better part of 2 years. She knew the difference between a table that wanted to be left alone and a table that wanted to feel seen. She knew which busboys skimmed the tip pool and which prep cook burned the hollandaise every Thursday. And she knew, without anyone ever sitting her down and explaining it, that the woman who came in every Wednesday at 7:30 and ordered the lamb chops medium rare with a glass of still water and no ice was not someone you lingered around. Eleanor Brandt was 74 years old. She walked with a slow, deliberate grace that made the dining room feel like it had been arranged specifically for her arrival. Silver-haired, straight-backed, wearing the kind of pearl earrings that didn't need to be large to make a statement, she came without fanfare. Just 2 men in dark suits posted near the hostess stand, and a third who sat at the small bar, nursing a club soda and watching the room like he was memorizing it. Piper had been serving Eleanor every Wednesday for 14 months. She knew her order before she sat down. She knew she preferred her water glass refilled before it hit the halfway mark. She knew she liked a small dish of lemon wedges on the side, even though she never used them. Eleanor Brandt was precise and self-contained, and the only time she ever really looked at Piper, truly looked at her, the way a person looks at another person rather than at a function, was the night Piper had slipped on a wet tile near the service corridor and caught herself on the edge of Eleanor's table. Eleanor had steadied her arm without flinching and said quietly, "Careful, dear. The floor has no loyalty." Piper had laughed without meaning to. Eleanor had smiled, just slightly, and gone back to her lamb chops. That was 11 weeks before the Wednesday everything changed. It was mid-October. The city outside had that particular New Orleans humidity that made the air feel like warm velvet against your skin. Marino's was running at capacity. The bar was 3 deep. The private dining room in the back had a 40th birthday party going loud, and the kitchen was already behind on 2 tables. Piper was moving fast, the way she always moved when the floor got complicated, that narrow-focused tunnel vision, where she stopped seeing the room as a room and started seeing it as a series of problems to solve in sequence. She was carrying a rack of water glasses toward the service station near the south wall when the front door opened. The man who walked in was not a regular. That was the first thing she registered. Not because he was out of place in terms of how he was dressed, but because of the way he moved. Too deliberate, too rehearsed. He had the look of someone who had thought carefully about where his hands would be before he walked through the door. He wasn't looking at the hostess. He wasn't looking at the bar. His eyes went straight across the dining room to the corner table, where Eleanor Brandt was cutting her lamb chops into precise, even pieces. Piper felt something shift in the air. She couldn't have explained it. Later, she would try, and the best she could manage was that some part of her brain, the animal part, the part that's older than language, understood what was happening before the rest of her caught up. The man's right hand came out of his jacket pocket. The 2 guards near the hostess stand were facing each other in conversation. The man at the bar had his back turned, reaching for his club soda. Eleanor Brandt looked up from her plate. Piper didn't think. She had no training, no preparation, no plan. She had a rack of water glasses and $42,000 of debt and a bone-deep stubbornness that her mother had always called her worst quality and her father had always called her best one. She moved. She threw herself sideways across the narrow aisle between the service station and the corner table, putting her body between the shooter and the 74-year-old woman, sitting there with her lamb chops and her still water. She heard 3 things in rapid succession: the muted, mechanical sound of a suppressed weapon discharging, once, twice, 3 times, the shattering of the water glasses hitting the travertine, and Eleanor Brandt's sharp, involuntary cry. The pain arrived a half-second later. The first bullet caught Piper in the upper chest, just below the left collarbone. The second found her side, low and brutal, punching through muscle and grazing a rib. The third went through her right arm, clean, which was the one piece of luck in the whole mess. She hit the floor face first, and the world went sideways. The dining room erupted, screaming from the birthday party in the back, chairs scraping, someone overturning a table. The guards were moving now, weapons drawn, shouting in a frequency Piper couldn't quite decode, because the sound had gotten strange, like she was hearing it from underwater. She could feel the cold travertine against her cheek and the warmth spreading out beneath her, and Eleanor Brandt's hands pressing down hard on her chest, and the old woman's voice saying something low and fierce and urgent that Piper couldn't quite hold on to. "Stay here," Eleanor was saying. "You stay here with me. Don't you dare close your eyes." The shooter was gone. She learned that later. He'd fired and run, a clean extraction through the kitchen service entrance, a car waiting in the alley. The guards at the front hadn't had time to respond. By the time they had their weapons up, there was nothing to shoot at. The man at the bar, the one who'd been nursing his club's soda, had thrown himself over the bar top and was already on his radio when the shooting stopped. He'd been trained for this. He just hadn't been fast enough. None of them had been as fast as Piper Daw. She was in surgery for 9 hours. The bullet in her chest had nicked the subclavian vein, which was the one that almost killed her. Not the rib, not the arm, the vein. She lost enough blood that 2 of the surgical team later described it as the closest call they'd seen that year. The hospital's 4th floor was locked down before she was out of the OR. Men in expensive suits occupied every corridor. The nursing staff, to their professional credit, kept working anyway. In a private waiting room at the end of the hall, a man stood at the window with his hands in his pockets and watched the headlights on the bridge over the Mississippi without seeing them. His name was Griffin Brandt. He was 41 years old. He ran the Brandt Organization, what the papers occasionally and carefully called a construction and hospitality empire with diverse regional interests, and what everyone in New Orleans actually understood to be the most efficiently managed and thoroughly insulated criminal syndicate in the Gulf Coast. Griffin had inherited it from his father at 32, restructured it in ways that made his enemies blink, and spent the better part of a decade making sure that his mother could have Wednesday lamb chops at Marino's without incident. He had failed at that last part. That was the only thought in his head right now, and it was running on a loop he couldn't shut off. His lieutenant, a careful man named Dennis Rourke, stood near the door and did not speak unless spoken to. He had learned early in his tenure that Griffin Brandt's silences were not invitations. The door opened and Eleanor walked in. She looked older than she had yesterday. That was what grief and shock and adrenaline did to a person, and Griffin knew it, and it still hit him somewhere undefended. She moved slowly, her right hand on the arm of a nurse she'd waved off twice and allowed on the 3rd offer. "She's stable," Eleanor said. Her voice was steady. "The surgeon says barring complications, she'll recover fully." Griffin turned from the window. "The girl," Eleanor continued, sitting down in the chair Dennis quietly provided. "Her name is Piper. She works a double shift on Wednesdays. She's 23. She is doing this to pay for nursing school." She let that sit in the air for a moment. "She has a younger brother, 18. Their mother is gone. Their father has been gone longer." "I know," Griffin said. "Denise ran her background in the first hour. Then you know she has no reason to have done what she did." "No," he said. "She doesn't." Eleanor folded her hands in her lap. She had the stillness of a person who had lived long enough to understand that there was no point in moving when the important thing was to think clearly. "You know what happens next, Griffin." He did. He had been knowing it since Dennis's first radio call. The Salieri faction, a rival network out of Baton Rouge that had been methodically looking for leverage against the Brandt Organization for 3 years, had just made the single most catastrophic mistake of their existence by sending a shooter into Marino's. They hadn't killed Eleanor. They hadn't even wounded her. What they had done instead was create a witness, a civilian hero, a woman whose survival was now an insult they would feel compelled to erase. "She's a loose end to them," Eleanor said. "The moment she leaves this hospital, they will try to finish it. And even if they don't, word will get out that she interfered with a sanctioned hit." Someone will come for her eventually. Out of spite, if nothing else. I can put men on her, Griffin said. A full detail. Relocate her if necessary. For how long? Eleanor's voice was quiet and absolutely direct. A year? 5 years? You cannot guard a civilian indefinitely, Griffin. People make mistakes. Guards get comfortable. And she has a life. A brother, a degree she's working toward. You cannot ask her to live inside a security perimeter forever. Griffin said nothing. He was already where she was leading him. He had been there for the last 20 minutes, standing at the window, staring at it from every angle, looking for a different exit. There wasn't one. In our world, Eleanor said, there are two kinds of people, those who belong to someone and those who don't. If Piper Daw belongs to no one, she is a target. If she belongs to you, if she is, in the eyes of every family and faction from here to Chicago, your wife, then touching her is the same as declaring war on the Brandt name. No one will dare. She's 23, Griffin said. She's a stranger. She put her body between me and 3 bullets, Eleanor replied. She is not a stranger to me. The silence stretched. Outside, a monitor beeped somewhere down the hall. The Mississippi was dark and wide and indifferent through the window. How do I ask her something like that? Griffin said. It was not quite a question. It came out quieter than he intended. Eleanor looked at him with the expression she reserved for when he was being slower than she knew he was capable of being. You tell her the truth, she said, all of it, and then you let her decide. Room 412 was dim and smelled of antiseptic and the faint residual sweetness of whatever they put in the IV lines. Piper was awake, barely. The morphine had its hands on the edges of everything. When the door opened, and a man she half recognized from the floor of Marino's walked in and sat down beside her bed without asking permission. He was large in the way that people are large when they take up a specific kind of space. Not just physical, but atmospheric. Dark-suited, tired around the eyes in a way that had nothing to do with the hour, with the kind of stillness that made you feel like the room had just stopped moving. Your mother, Piper said. Her voice came out rougher than she expected. Is she? Fine, he said. Not a scratch on her. She let out a breath that turned into a wince halfway through, and he watched her with an expression she couldn't quite categorize. Not pity, not gratitude exactly, something more complicated than either. My name is Griffin Brandt, he said. I know who you are, Piper said. Sort of. He nodded slowly. He didn't waste time. She was already in pain, already exhausted. He seemed to understand that the only mercy available was honesty. He told her exactly what had happened, what it meant, and what would happen if she went back to her life without protection. He told her about the Salieri faction. He told her what they would do to a civilian who had humiliated them by surviving an operation they'd paid good money for. He was precise and unsentimental, and he did not soften a single word. When he finished, Piper stared at the ceiling for a long time. So I survived getting shot, she said, so that I could spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. Not necessarily, Griffin said. What does that mean? He told her. She turned her head on the pillow and looked at him with an expression that, under different circumstances, might have been funny. You're asking me to marry you, she said flatly, in a hospital room, while I'm on morphine. I'm telling you it's the only arrangement that guarantees your safety, he said. In our world, a boss's wife is untouchable. There are rules, old ones, and they hold. If you carry my name, no one will move against you. Not the Salieris, not anyone. What do you get out of it? The question seemed to surprise him slightly. Most people didn't ask that. I pay a debt, he said. You saved my mother's life. In my world, that obligation doesn't go away because it's inconvenient. Piper was quiet for a long time. She was thinking about her brother Danny, who was 18 and working 2 jobs and not complaining about either one, and who had been in the waiting room downstairs for 6 hours because no one had thought to tell him he could go home. She was thinking about the rent she owed on the first. She was thinking about the cold, deliberate way the man in the restaurant had raised his hand, and how she had understood in that fraction of a second that he was going to kill an old woman who liked still water with no ice. She hadn't thought about Griffin Brandt or the Brandt organization or any of this when she moved. She had just moved, and now here she was, with a man she didn't know offering her a ring and a name and a promise in a language she barely spoke. My brother, she said quietly, Danny. He's 18. He needs help with tuition, and he won't ask for it. It's done, Griffin said, without hesitation. You don't know what school he wants to go to. Then I'll pay for wherever he chooses. She looked at him again. You can't just, she stopped. She thought about the way Eleanor's hands had felt pressing down on her chest in the restaurant, steady and fierce, and refusing to let go. Okay, Piper said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. Okay, I'll do it. The wedding happened 4 hours later, which was the strangest sentence Piper would ever have occasion to say about her own life. A priest named Father Clement arrived, older, soft-spoken, with the air of a man who had been asked to perform ceremonies in unusual circumstances before and had made peace with it. Eleanor sat in the corner chair with her rosary and her composure. Dennis Rourke and 2 other men Piper didn't know stood near the wall. Griffin stood beside her bed. He looked like a man completing a strategic transaction, which was honest, and Piper found she preferred that to pretending otherwise. When Father Clement reached the ring, Griffin produced one from the inside pocket of his jacket. A heavy antique thing, diamonds set in platinum, clearly old enough to have belonged to someone before her. He took her uninjured hand, his fingers careful around the IV line. He slid the ring onto her finger with a precision that suggested he had thought about exactly this gesture, exactly this moment. You're safe now, he said, low enough that only she could hear it. I stake my name on it. That's a very organized way to propose, Piper said. Something moved across his face that was almost, but not quite, a smile. Eleanor crossed herself and pressed her rosary to her lips and wept very quietly, which was the most unguarded Piper had ever seen her. The door to room 412 was barely closed before the 4th floor became a different kind of place. The quiet shifted. One of Dennis's men, posted at the east end of the corridor, made a check-in call that was 3 minutes overdue. Dennis didn't comment on it. He walked to the nurse's station, asked a question about medication scheduling that he didn't actually need answered, and on the way back he passed the utility closet near the elevator bay and registered, without looking directly at it, that the door was not quite latched. He was back at Griffin's side in under 90 seconds. We have a problem, he said quietly. What followed happened very fast and without warning, the way things did when preparation met the precise moment its makers intended. It was 2 a.m. Piper was half asleep, the morphine winning its argument with her nervous system, when she registered the quality outside her door change. She had worked enough late-night shifts to know the difference between the silence of a building settling and the silence of something holding its breath. Griffin, she said. He was already on his feet. The door handle moved, slowly, with the careful deliberateness of someone who knew there was a man on the other side they didn't want to alert. Griffin's weapon was drawn before the handle completed its turn. He moved to the left side of the door frame. Don't move, don't make a sound. And the first shot came through the door before it opened. The room detonated into noise and motion. Piper rolled off the bed on pure instinct, the IV line tearing free, hitting the floor on her injured side, and biting down on a scream, because he had told her to be quiet, and she had decided in the last 4 hours that this man's instructions were worth following. She dragged herself behind the upended mattress. He'd kicked the base of the bed frame outward as a barricade. She realized he had done it in the same motion as raising his weapon, the 2 things happening simultaneously like he'd thought it through in advance. And she pressed her back to the cold steel and put her hands over her ears because the sound was extraordinary. 3 shots from Griffin, 2 bodies in the doorway. A third man edged in low from the left, and Griffin tracked him with a fluency that had nothing recreational about it. 2 shots, and the man was down. Are you hit? Griffin called. No, she said, which was technically true if you didn't count the IV tear or the ribs, or the fact that her hands were shaking so hard she couldn't have held a glass of water. Stay down. She stayed down. The 4th man came in through the bathroom window, a fact that suggested the kind of operational planning that Piper found, even in the middle of it, deeply unwelcome, and Griffin heard him a half-second before he was fully through and put him down before he cleared the frame. Then it was quiet. Not the held breath quiet from before. The after-quiet, flat and final, the kind that rang slightly in the ears. Griffin walked around the upended mattress and crouched beside her. He was breathing hard, which was the first time she had seen him do anything that suggested ordinary human physiology. His hands went to her face, her shoulders, checking, and then he pulled her into his chest without seeming to decide to do it, and she pressed her forehead against his collarbone and tried to remember how to exhale. "Someone opened the floor to them," he said, his voice still controlled, but with something underneath it. A low-current fury that she could feel where her forehead met his shirt. "Someone on my payroll." The name came out in the next 20 minutes, when Dennis and the loyal men arrived, and the room became a controlled kind of chaos. A guard named Russell Holt, who had been with the organization for 6 years and had eaten at the Brandt family table at Christmas, had disabled the cameras and dismissed the outer perimeter, and sent a message to the Salieri faction telling them exactly where Piper was and exactly how long they had. Griffin didn't raise his voice when he learned this. He didn't need to. Piper watched him absorb the information, watched the way something in his face went very still and very cold, the way a controlled burn goes cold just before it becomes something else entirely. And she understood for the first time, in a way that was physical rather than intellectual, what kind of man she had married 4 hours ago. She thought she should be more frightened than she was. She wasn't, particularly. She would examine that later. "We're moving," Griffin told Dennis. "Tonight. Get Davidson. Dr. Davidson is in Memphis," Dennis said. "Then he's in New Orleans by morning. My wife is going home." The Brandt estate was 23 minutes outside the city, on a private road that didn't appear on public maps, behind a gate system and ground security that Piper would spend the first 2 weeks not fully understanding but slowly mapping in her head, the way she mapped the Marino's floor on her first week, quietly, systematically, noting where things were and how they moved. The house itself was not what she expected. She had braced herself for something ostentatious, all Italian marble and oil portraits of serious men. What she got was a house that looked like it had been lived in for several generations, by people who had specific opinions about comfort, bookshelves that had been used, a kitchen that smelled like someone had cooked in it recently and often, a back garden that was clearly Eleanor's project, still holding on to the last of the October color. She was installed in the east wing, in a room with high ceilings and long windows that looked out over an oak you could have fit a small car inside. Dr. Harlan Davidson arrived at 6 in the morning, precise and unflappable, and began the work of undoing what the last 12 hours had done to her body. For 3 weeks she healed. Griffin was present, the way weather was present, not always visible but always felt. He checked in twice a day, brief and practical, asking about her pain levels, her appetite, what she needed. He had Danny's tuition handled within 48 hours. She knew because Danny called, bewildered and grateful, and only slightly suspicious, to tell her. She had told him the marriage was complicated and fast, and that she would explain everything when she could sit up without wincing. He had said, "Piper, what did you do?" in the particular tone he reserved for when she had done something that alarmed him. "Something impulsive," she said, "but I think it's going to be okay." She was not entirely sure of that when she said it. She became more sure as the weeks passed. Griffin, as it turned out, did not know how to talk to her in the low-stakes moments. He was excellent at crises, crisp, direct, utterly reliable. But when there was no immediate problem to solve, he defaulted to a formal distance that Piper, who had been reading people for tips since she was 16, recognized as a man who had spent so long being the most dangerous person in every room that he had forgotten how to be the most ordinary one. She found this, against her better judgment, a little endearing. She was sitting up in bed one evening, the 3rd week, the pain down to a manageable ache rather than an insistent roar, reading one of the books she'd pulled from the shelf in the hallway, when Griffin knocked and let himself in. He did this the same way he did everything, deliberate and unhurried. He had a glass of water and a look on his face that suggested he had not come for a specific reason and was not sure what to do with that. He sat down in the chair by the window. He didn't speak immediately. "Your uncle," Piper said, not looking up from her book. Griffin went still. "What about him?" She had heard Dennis and one of the other lieutenants in the hall the day before, talking in the tone of men who thought they were being quiet. "There was someone on the inside," she said. "Not just Russell Holt. Someone higher. Someone who started this whole thing." She looked up then. Griffin was watching her with an expression she was starting to recognize, the one where he was recalibrating something. His name was Ellard, Griffin said, after a pause. My father's brother. He wanted the organization. What happened to him? He's gone, Griffin said, simply, fenitly. Piper nodded and went back to her book. She heard him exhale, slowly, through his nose. She heard him shift in the chair, the particular sound of a large person settling into a space they intend to occupy for a while. He was still there when she fell asleep. November arrived, and the oak outside her window turned a color that had no business existing in nature, deep copper shading into amber, lit from behind by the low afternoon sun. The Salieri faction had been, as Dennis put it with characteristic understatement, comprehensively addressed. The internal rot had been cut out. The organization had closed ranks and become, if anything, quieter and more precise than it had been before. And Piper Daw was learning to walk the halls of the Brant estate without counting exits, which was progress. She was in the kitchen on a Thursday evening, Dr. Davidson had cleared her for light activity, and she had discovered that the Brant household possessed an excellent cast-iron skillet, and absolutely no one who knew what to do with it. When Griffin came in and stopped in the doorway. "What are you doing?" he said. "Making pasta," she said. "Sit down or get out of my way." He sat down. She could feel him watching her from the island, which she chose to ignore. "Danny visited," she said. "I know. He liked the library." Dennis showed him around. She smiled at the pot. "He's going to school for environmental engineering," she said. "You might want to know that, since you're paying for it." "I know that too," Griffin said. "He told me when he was here. We talked for 40 minutes. She turned around. "You talked to my brother for 40 minutes. He's interesting," Griffin said, with a slight defensiveness that was entirely unlike him and therefore, to Piper, deeply interesting. He had a lot of opinions about coastal erosion. She turned back to the pasta and did not let him see her face for a few seconds. "Griffin," she said eventually. "Yes, thank you." She said it simply, without ceremony, the way she said things when she meant them the most. "For my brother, for the doctor, for the—" She paused, searching for the right word. "All of this." Silence from the island. "Then you took 3 bullets for my mother. That's not why I'm thanking you." Another silence, different quality. "Why then?" he said. She turned around. He was sitting with his hands flat on the island surface and looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen before. Unguarded, in the way that a person is unguarded when they've been tired long enough to stop managing their face. He looked, she thought, like a man who had been holding something heavy for a very long time, and was starting to wonder if he might be allowed to put it down. "Because you told me the truth," she said. "In the hospital. You could have offered me money and a security detail and not explained any of it, and I probably would have been too scared to ask questions. But you told me exactly what I was walking into, every part of it." He looked at her. "I want to stay," she said. "I'm not staying because I have to. I'm not staying because I don't have anywhere else to go. I'm staying because—" She stopped. She thought about the oak tree outside her window in the morning, and Danny's voice on the phone, easy and unburdened for the first time in years, and the cast-iron skillet, and Eleanor's Wednesday lamb chops, and the particular quality of Griffin Brant's silence when she fell asleep in her chair. "Because this is starting to feel like somewhere I belong," she said. "And I don't say that lightly. I've never said that about anywhere before." Griffin stood up from the island. He crossed the kitchen in the slow, deliberate way he moved when he had decided something and was not in a hurry about it. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to look up to see his face. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with a carefulness that did not match anything else about him, anything about his hands or his history, or the way the world understood him. "You're not leaving," he said. Not a question, not a command, something else, a recalibration of everything he'd been calculating wrong for the past 3 weeks. "No," Piper said. "I'm not." He kissed her the way he did everything that mattered to him, without performance, without excess, with a precision that said he had been thinking about it longer than he intended to admit. When Eleanor came to check on dinner 20 minutes later and found them both standing in her kitchen, the pasta on the stove, and neither of them paying it any attention, she turned around without a word, walked back down the hall. and allowed herself the private satisfaction of a woman who had been right about something important. Outside, New Orleans did what it always did, ran loud and warm and complicated under a November sky, indifferent to the small domestic miracle happening in the kitchen of a house on a private road. The waitress who had thrown herself in front of 3 bullets for a stranger had not just survived. She had, without planning or strategy, or any of the calculus by which powerful men organize their lives, walked into the most fortified household in the Gulf Coast and made it feel, for the first time in years, like a home. What would you have done in Piper's place? Would you have taken the deal or walked away? And do you think Griffin's feelings for her were inevitable the moment she hit the floor at Marino's, or did it take something longer? Tell us in the comments. If this story moved you, hit like and subscribe to Rosie's Romance Library. There are more stories like this one waiting for you.